Hi and welcome to the Real Issues with Kagwa. I want to have these conversations about the USAID, but I'm going to be taking them in bits so that it does not become too long and boring. I'm going to be breaking them in segments, and today I'm going to be starting with the foundation of what we'll begin to see as philanthropy, aid, and grants. This is because a lot of Africans continue to say that they don't see the impact of grants, and the pause on grants to Africa is the best thing that should happen. And it's quite funny for me because they really don't understand what is upon them, and the culture behind demanding that government takes responsibility. It's always easy to blame the government. But you know what? Every one of us will never move a muscle beyond this armchair criticism. And we are not going to be demanding and putting words into action to see this happen. The word aid does not really exist. The book you see here, if you've ever read it, gave an idea of why philanthropy, donations, grants, and funding became prominent in the 19th century. The culture of grants and funding began with three major Americans in recent times: John D. Rockefeller, Henry Ford, and Andrew Carnegie. These guys made wealth, they made fortunes, and they were criticized for monopolistic tendencies during that era. That was a time when the Industrial Revolution was actually at its peak. And after they made money, they realized that their resources had created pain. Industrialization came with a lot of pain. If you read the book I just showed you, it explains the 1,000 years of technology until Thomas Edison's invention changed the world. Prior to that time, there were issues around underage labor. Pregnant women and sick people were meant to work in harsh conditions. Tuberculosis and all forms of illnesses contributed to reducing lifespan of humans. So only those who had technology or who had the means of wealth were the ones who were prospering from technology. In other words, there was no shared prosperity. I say this a lot. And until Thomas Edison invented electricity, and electricity became a general purpose vehicle, workers didn't get so much from hard work. So when these guys made money, Andrew Carnegie mobilized his friends. John D. Rockefeller at the time controlled 90% of the oil market in the US, and he was a billionaire. And he founded the Standard Oil. And you have Henry Ford on the other hand. And they realized that it was useless to die and share their wealth with families alone. In 1889, Carnegie wrote his essay, The Gospel of Wealth, where he talked about the need to redistribute wealth instead of keeping it within his family. He made good his promise by investing $350 million, that's about $11 billion today, to build over 2,500 libraries across Asia and Africa. He went further to advocate for peace, and he invested heavily in these sectors. And he established an endowment fund. And today we know about the Carnegie Institution. John D. Rockefeller would begin to look at global health, as well as Henry Ford. And these guys began to see reasons why there was need to begin to invest and redistribute their wealth. That was the beginning of funding. And it was because of industrial age, because they realized that humans didn't benefit from technology, and those who were workers died, suffered, and didn't get the benefit of shared prosperity that technology would have brought in. And the activities of John D. Rockefeller and Henry Ford would lay the basic foundation for the WHO. And thereafter, the USAID would also get inspiration from these activities. In 1961, John F. Kennedy would establish the USAID. However, Harry Truman and the previous president had also worked on the framework that John F. Kennedy completed. So the USAID would become the Humanitarian Agency of the United States of America. And it also influenced what they call the soft power as well. So the USAID was responsible for supporting different interventions around the world, particularly to developing nations, be it education, economics, health, and politics. So looking at what has happened in the past and the fact that humans have suffered, particularly in developing nations where resources were gotten from, and the fact that Europe, as well as America, during the Industrial Revolution, had a lot of people who suffered trying to ensure that technology provided prosperity to humans. However, those behind technology didn't get so much. This is the reason why the culture of giving funding, grants, and aid began. It is not to developing nations alone that grants are given. Even developed nations also get grants. I've seen Africans giving grants to schools in the United States, Europe, and other parts of the world. Do we need grants? Sure, we need them. Are there leakages? A little bit, no doubt. However, the understanding we have about the USAID is one that we need to clarify a lot, because the USAID has different strategy and different intervention means that people don't know about. When you look at what Dutch did recently, it was more or less a propaganda thing, because the USAID and Dutch didn't sit to discuss what has happened. They broke into their system, saw the list of the things they saw, allegedly, and they began to run with it. Because statistics show that 40% of Americans rely on the social media as their news source. But the social media is not a reliable news source. I will be looking at other sectors of the USAID and how USAID has made impact in the world. But I want us to understand that the culture of aid is one thing we can't whisk away. Holding our government accountable and ensuring that government provide the basic needs of the people is what everybody must do. But it's not about writing alone. We need to demand accountability. We need to ask questions. We need to ask those we've elected. And it's not about saying it's enough, grants have been withdrawn, our government needs to sit up. No government will sit up except you push them. And you can't push them through the internet alone, because they have been immune. They understand that if you don't push them, nothing will move. And that's the game we play with them. Nobody is giving anybody grants that is free. I'm going to get into that in the next video. So when they seize these grants, it is not to your advantage, because they still rely on your resources. And no nation operates as an island. If you take my resources and you don't give me some sort of grants to develop, to provide healthcare, to cater for education, economy, and agriculture, it means it's not a symbiotic relationship. Does the USAID fund the public institutions, the public sector? I don't think it's true. It was back in the day. But as at the time when some of us worked, these guys had stopped funding the government. They were rather interested in the private sector because they wanted to build institutions. Because they believe the private sectors will continue from wherever interventions stop. And they also realized that your country isn't as poor as they thought. Because when they see the kind of money your politicians are stashing abroad and how they're living lavishly, they just didn't see the need to fund public institutions. So when you blame the USAID in your country, I need you to know that the USAID is not funding government initiatives. It began to fund the private sectors, except for some sort of intervention that has to also have the government bring in their counterpart funding and also support, at most, treatment sites where that's the channel and infrastructure available, which is actually the most safest to push some commodities like the ARVs through. But to fund critical projects and interventions in country, the USAID began to pull out of the public sector initiatives. So when you want to blame the USAID, note that the USAID hardly gives funding to your government. I'll speak some more on some of the other issues in my next video, and see you in the next video.